Welcome, Dr. Roberta Hines, the chairman and professor at Yale University. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to you. Any advice or recommendations you can give to any individual who's seeking or starting to gain leadership roles?
It's so important that one prepares oneself. And I don't mean to trivialize that response, but we spend 4 years or 5 years or 7 years, pick a number, right? We spend a lot of years training to be a clinician, right? We would not walk into the OR on day one and think that we're going to be, that we're going to be appropriate to treat hypotension. But we often think about leadership as we can do it without having the requisite skills to do it. And we do that in education. We certainly do it in research, right? Look at our fellowships. We're one of the few specialties that don't have a required research component for our fellowships. We're just beginning to have required educational training as as teachers in our residency programs. How many times, and this happened to me, right? You finish your fellowship and suddenly you're going in the room and someone thinks you know how to teach. Well, you know how you were taught, but you don't know how to teach. And so we often think we have very smart people and we think somehow by osmosis, right, we get these traits. And we really don't focus on getting people the appropriate skill sets in any domain. And I think education is the one where is more woefully underserved, because we just all think that because we're surrounded by smart people, we don't have to think about education as a science and structure it around us. So I'm a big fan of truly lifelong learning. I have had many coaches in my life, and I'm a big fan of coaching, particularly for folks as they advance in their career, because coaches come in a variety of skill sets as well. You may need a professional coach at one point. You may need someone who can teach you business skills at another. You may need someone who can teach you about negotiation. So it's not a one-size-fits-all for sure. And that's also an area where we don't give ourselves permission. And also when we're negotiating a role, our male colleagues it would be very unusual for our male colleagues to negotiate a section chief role or a leadership role without having some leadership coaching or leadership support. We often don't know to ask that question. So I would encourage everyone, that is probably the most value added thing one can ask for when you're getting a leadership role, making sure that you're going to continue to move yourself forward. And I just recently completed a course in value-based healthcare. And because, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, to be honest, but it was intellectually incredibly amazing. I learned a lot, and now I'm, using it as a way to teach quality and safety to our trainees. So, for me, it's just this positive sense of inquiry and always thinking about ways that you can refresh your skill set.
If you don't have the opportunity to get these leadership classes through your department, I know the ASA has some, and you just have to look to find something that you can spend a little bit of your time, but it's helpful.
Right. And many people get overwhelmed because you do, in my opinion, you do not need to have more initials after your name. So you don't need to one could, I'm not anti or pro, but so many people think if I'm going to do this, I have to spend $80,000 or $120,000 and get another degree. That may work. That is not necessary. One can take a course over a weekend for 3-4 days. One can do so much online. The course I just completed, even if it were not COVID, would have been totally remote. So the way in which we learn, and so I think once again, as we talked about being really creative and inclusive in how you develop your career. Really be inclusive in how you think about getting those courses, right? Online is wonderful. The AAMC also, I would encourage all the women. There are several women development courses at the AAMC that go through many phases of the career, particularly for folks who are interested in an academic career. It is wonderful. They're very affordable. They're not that difficult in terms of timing, not that consumptive. So that's where a mentor should help you. A mentor should also open doors for you in terms of what courses are available for you to access.
What is the best advice you've received from a mentor or a sponsor?
It really is to ask myself the difficult questions. And the best mentors you'll ever have are really asking you to do that. It's a little bit like parenting, and I'm not trying to trivialize mentoring and parenting or trivialize parenting, but the least effective mentors I've ever had are people who expect me to be just like them. That's the easy part, right? You're going to do this because I've been successful at it, and I can make you as successful as I am at that. And they know how to get you there, right? They know that pathway. But the most effective mentors I've ever had have said to me, now, what do you really want to do? And why do you want to do it? And how can we, not how can I, not how can you, but it's the we. How can we get you to that place? And when you have a mentor who offers that we word, that for me is truly the best phrase ever, because they're not asking you to do something without supporting you, and they're not expecting you to do what they want you to do. So if you can have that conversation with the mentor and get a really sense of what you want to do and how they're going to help you get there, that's a really substantive conversation. And like I said, it's a lot easier sometimes when a mentor comes and says, I'm successful in this domain, come join my research group, come join my lab, and just take and there's nothing, and there's really good to join the lab or join the research group, but then give yourself permission to take your own stance on something and capitalize on the resources, but don't be smothered by them, right? You don't want to be a me too. You want to take the best of that group and build on it. And I've done both and learned from those experiences. And it's really hard to extricate yourself from something when your mentor expects that you're going to follow in their footsteps, and you suddenly go, well, thank you very much, but, right? And you have to be prepared for what happens after that thank you very much but conversation, because that it may be embraced and it may not be, but it's important for you to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's true. You have to figure your own path, and sometimes you want to just do the path that they're offering because it feels easy, but it's not. Nothing's easy, so you have to make sure you pick something that rings true to you, and as you said, that you're passionate about, because you're gonna have to do it for a while. So
right. And I think that's why a lot of people get disenchanted with academics, because they see that a very successful mentor, they don't appreciate the trajectory from getting from where they are to there, and they start that trajectory and it's not the one they want, and they don't know how to change, have a mid-course correction, right? Mm-hmm. And so they keep investing and investing. And as you say, it's time. It is an investment's important, but it's time consuming. It's emotionally consuming. It's physically consuming. And the other thing I would recommend is people, know yourself. If you're in that spot, you find somebody else to have a conversation with, right? The first person you question that conversation with shouldn't be your mentor. That's a very difficult conversation. But I will assure you that you're not the first person who's had that sort of questioning attitude. So I would encourage people to look outside and see if they can identify, or who they can identify as a sounding board, to say, here's what I thought, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I think. Am I thinking about this the right way? Or what's your impression? And what should, just to get another sense of perspective.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is why we all need more than one mentor. It
takes a large village. Takes a large village.
Right. That's another thing that I've realized is that no one has just one mentor, and which is again goes back to my this is why you need to join committees and meet people and network, because you never know who can be your mentor. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be someone in anesthesia, actually. It could be anybody else.
Right. And it can be, I've been blessed by having incredible mentors. And like I said, many of them would not even be traditional. I've had, mentors who are, come from nursing, come from other areas, and where in the hospital, who you may have met on these committees, right? They're not even in your sphere. But because mentorship is a personal connection as well. It's not just an intellectual connection, it's a personal connection, right? And so it's really, that circle should be as inclusive as possible, and allowing yourself to really, one of my most interesting mentors was someone who's a child life specialist. And, maybe that's because I behave like a child. I'm not entirely sure. But it was, and it's a child life specialist who was on a committee that I was on, and this individual had such high emotional intelligence. Just amazing. And I have utilized her, for 20 years of my career. Whenever I had a concern about an interpersonal issue, even though she, like I said, she doesn't really know anything about anesthesia. She, and I know it's a she, but she doesn't know anything about anesthesia, but she's dealt with these incredibly difficult conversations, and she has such a unique perspective that I call her, and I think that's the other beauty. Have people who you feel comfortable having really important and difficult and conversations that when the conversation is over, it's not shared.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What pearls of wisdom would you like to share to fellow women in anesthesia?
Wow, that's a hard question. We could spend hours talking about that. Hours and days. And but I do think we've talked a lot, and we've touched a lot of the topics, which is really know your inner self, know who you are. Let your path be guided by your passion, right? Not be afraid to question and to make mid-career, mid-course changes. And listen to yourself. If it doesn't feel right, don't make it feel right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It should not be a force. There's not one way to do this. And you don't have to look or act like anyone else. There are certain norms that we have to all abide by, right? Social norms, but you don't need to dress. You don't need to talk. You don't need to be a conformist. And once again, there's certain, you can't get too far on one side or the other, but I do think a lot of women feel really bound by conformity in a way that our male colleagues don't, right? They worry about standing out and looking different, and that's not always a good thing. I believe being slightly different is a very good thing, and you should celebrate what makes you different. And not hide that. And that's what our trainees want to see too, right? They don't want to see a cookie cutter way to get to somewhere. That's not a generation. They're not going to embrace that from their generation, right? So we need to, once again, if we're going to get back to developing people in leadership, they're going to know that there are many, many ways to be successful, and that one can look a certain way and talk a certain way and be a certain way, and choose different avenues to get there. And that's going to not only make us better and happier, but it's going to really, really inform the success of the next group of people who are coming, right? And it's easier to say than do. I know that for a fact. But and people are going to make some comments about when you dare to be different. And sometimes they're just jealous comments, and sometimes they're hurtful comments, and you need to find a way how to just manage those internally as well, because sometimes difference really scares some people when you're doing something that differently than they would do it. They don't know how to integrate that in their own psyche. So sometimes they can be hurtful, not really meaning to be. But anyways, it's really follow your passion, reevaluate your passion. Don't be afraid to take some risk when you feel comfortable with that risk, right? you can jump off a curb, don't jump off a cliff, right? So so small risks where you know that you can manage what's on the other side of that. And like I said, don't be afraid to say, is this making me happy? Is this where I want to go? Is this fulfilling? Because that's the most important thing. And is it enriching, right? Is it making me a better person?
Thank you for highlighting and talking about these topics, because it's not often talked about. And I think it's important for us as women, as anesthesiologists, as a diverse specialty. We need to hear all these things and to learn and grow as people, individuals, and as a specialty.
Right. And we have to celebrate the differences, right? Not everyone's going to agree with my comments, and that's cool. That's what makes us, that's what pushes us forward. But it's really opening up the dialogue is so important about any aspect. And we haven't done that enough in many avenues recently, right? We need to open up those dialogues.
Yeah. No, and it's great to hear different perspectives, right? Everyone has a different take on how their own life experience has been, and we learn from all of them.
Life is very dependent upon your journey and your lineage and opportunities that you were given and how you view things, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a first generation person like I am to go to college, right? No one in my family had ever been to college before. Mm-hmm. So I view things very differently than folks who may not have, right? Or vice versa. So your history definitely informs how you view things and what you view, how you prioritize things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for this. This was wonderful
talking to you and listening.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing